So just to, I guess, introduce myself. So my name's Stephen. I'm currently working as a specialist support team manager. I work across residential services and also education. I've been working in learning disability services for about 15 years now, and I've primarily worked in a behaviour support context. So what I'm going to be talking you through today is about my experience of reducing restrictive practices using a positive behaviour support framework. I will start by giving you a bit of a background as to why we do that, but I'm primarily going to focus on case studies from an organizational perspective and also from an individual perspective. So reducing restrictive practices. So this is for the past few years, this has been an area of health and social care that is quite critical. We've seen different initiatives that have come up over the years. We've seen the Restraint Reduction Network. We've seen different training standards rolled out around restraint reduction. We've seen initiatives such as stopping the over-medication of people with learning disabilities, also known as STOMP. And we've seen different kind of cases where practice hasn't been as it should be, which has raised the need to reduce restrictive practices for people with learning disabilities. We know that people with learning disabilities are more at risk of being subject to restrictive practices. And whilst restrictive practices, there may be a time and place where they're needed to prevent harm, services do have a responsibility to make sure these are reasonable, proportionate, and necessary in line with the law. One of the challenges, I think, for services is not only just to reduce restraint, but to make sure environments are more capable. And one of the key factors that I think, let's have to come off. One of the key factors is looking at the human impact for restraint. So we all work in human services. Therefore, it's important that we put the people we support at the center of what we're doing. But research and lived experience has consistently shown that restraint can have profound consequences. This can include things such as trauma and fear, loss of trust, increased anxiety or aggression, staff burnout, which often leads to staff turnover, and often results in breakdown of therapeutic relationships. I think for people with learning disabilities, what we know already is that they often experience inequalities already. They have reduced autonomy on occasions, and at times will face things such as social exclusion. Therefore, when we look at things such as restrictive practice, it's both a clinical priority and ethical responsibility. When we think about restrictive practices, I'm sure we're all aware of the different types of restrictive practices that are out there. We often might see physical restraints that are occurring. We might see things such as chemical restraints, such as the use of psychotropic medication to manage behaviours. We might see things such as mechanical restraints in terms of using equipment to restrict people's body movements. We might see things such as environmental restraints. That means people are more contained within their environment or have restricted access within the environments in which they live. And we also may see things such as psychological restraint, but hopefully that is something we would see a bit less, which is essentially making people feel guilty or inducing fear amongst individuals in order for them to comply with what you want them to do. Some of the risk factors that we often see that comes up in both research and practice is a lack of training. If people have a lack of training, whether it's in learning disabilities, whether it's in positive behaviour support, or whether it's just in proactive preventative approaches. Other factors such as inadequate staffing levels or poor communication amongst staff teams, and also poor communication with the people we support. Other factors also include things such as overstimulating environments, but also environments that may not meet people's emotional and sensory needs. And what we know is that behaviour is often a form of communication, and when services shift from how do we stop this behaviour to what is the person trying to tell us, we see that outcomes can improve significantly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through from an organizational perspective what this has looked like for us and what we've done to put in a positive behavior support framework to reduce restrictive practices. So we are a growing organization. We support both adults and children with learning disabilities across both residential and education. But what we found was there was a need for a clear framework to reduce restrictive practices. And in 2021, that's when our restraint reduction journey began. And we did this by introducing a PBS-wide framework. And the primary reasons for this was to make sure we had standardized structure and processes, to make sure our resources from a support function point of view also match the level of need of the people we support. Um, we had a keen interest on making sure that all decisions that we were making were data driven, and also that we wanted to improve the culture in terms of having more of a preventative skills building culture rather than a reactive behavior management culture. So some of the things that we did, so one of the first things was looking at setting up our resource. So we developed what we call a specialist support team, and that includes positive behavior support practitioners, speech and language therapy, and occupational therapy. It was really important for us that we had an MDT approach within a BBS framework. So we weren't just employing positive behavior support practitioners, but we also had experts from speech and language in terms of communication and occupational therapy to get that kind of expert lens from a sensory perspective as well. We developed some of our PBS policies and processes. What we know is that policy alone, the effectiveness of that change in people's behavior is probably quite limited. Whereas if you have strong processes around that, there's more likelihood for success. So we developed a tiered model of PBS support. This is quite common in the PBS literature, but how we implemented that in practice was for someone who's in a tier one, it means that they don't require any specialist support and that they have all of the usual required training, such as learning disability education, PBS training, and all of that. And we don't have any concerns about someone's quality of life or behaviors of concern when they're in tier one. However, when someone's placed in tier two of our care offer, it means that we have a level of concern about their quality of life. And we may also be seeing restrictive practices start to be introduced or increase, or just some escalations in behaviors of concern. What this looks like for us is when someone's placed in tier two, we will allocate a positive behavior support lead to essentially coordinate their care. So they will coordinate all of the MDT, both internally and externally, and they will run monthly reviews, and that will primarily focus on quality of life improvement and behavior concern reduction, and looking at those MDT actions and outcomes on a monthly basis. When someone goes into tier three of our great care offer, this means that we have significant concerns about someone's quality of life, and we may also be seeing an increase in restrictive practices and behaviors of concern in general. Similar to tier two, when someone's placed in tier three, a PBS lead would be allocated, and they will again coordinate the care and support, but this will be done on a weekly basis, and they will coordinate weekly reviews, again making sure there's a clear focus on quality of life improvement, but also on behavior reduction and looking at those MDT support and outcomes. We also looked at our training framework. We made sure that everyone within Bright Futures had PBS training from the moment that they started within Bright Futures, which I imagine is pretty standard across a lot of organizations. But we also wanted to focus on the practice leadership side of things. So we provided enhanced training to our registered managers to make sure that practice leadership was something that was happening on a day-to-day basis. We also looked at our CPD offers within our support functions and making sure that we had enhanced training and qualifications for support functions, including both master levels qualifications and vocational qualifications up to like a level 5. We also focused on training needs analysis, particularly around physical intervention. This was key for us in terms of having an impact on reducing restrictive practices, because we offer two types of physical intervention training. One would be classed as intermediate and the other would be classed as advanced. What we changed was we only provided advanced level of physical intervention training on an as required basis. So if we felt that there was a need, we would do a training needs analysis and we would identify those areas or those people that may require more advanced support. Because what we found was, and what the evidence often shows within physical intervention training, is that when you provide a higher level of training, the likelihood of people using a higher level of training is higher, and we didn't really want that to happen. So it was only on an as required basis. We also made sure that all of our training standards were in line with the restraint reduction standards that were set out. And this also provides a level of quality assurance for our training, because it means we have someone come out to observe our practice and make sure that what we're delivering is of the best quality as what it should be. Another key focus was around data analysis and key performance indicators. So on a monthly basis, the specialist support team will identify themes and trends in practice, and we'll do this both from a whole organizational perspective, but also from an individual home or school perspective. And that will primarily focus on any lessons learned over that month and any actions that we need to take. We also set out key performance indicators for restraint reduction. So on an annual basis, we will look at aiming to achieve a certain percentage reduction from both intermediate perspective and from an advanced perspective. And this provides a level of goal setting for not just people in a behaviour support role, but for all of our operational colleagues, that they have a goal to achieve to reduce restrictive practices. And that's reviewed on a monthly basis on a scorecard. And we also have incentive systems in place for our registered managers when they achieve some of these KPIs. We also look at things on an annual basis, so we're learning year on year what maybe wasn't working and what we needed to do, and that would set out the actions for the year to come of any practices that we needed to change or adapt, or any resources we needed to review. Another key focus was looking at our debrief processes and making sure that we were very much promoting a learning culture across all of our homes and schools. So what we do is the specialist support team will do weekly compliance tracking of both hot and cold debriefs for incidents that happen within our services. Our hot debriefs will focus on physical and emotional well-being of both the people we support and our support staff, and these need to be completed within 24 hours, whereas our cold debriefs will focus on lessons learned, and these must be completed within 72 hours. So on a weekly basis, all registered managers will get a compliance score of where they are up to with their debriefs, just to make sure we're continuously monitoring and really promoting that kind of learning culture. We also introduced a process called after action reviews, which for anyone who might work in some NHS services, these often form part of patient safety frameworks. And essentially what it is a member of the specialist support team will go out following a serious incident. They will meet with all professionals involved and any support workers involved, and the key focus will be on what are the lessons that we learned from this incident and what actions need to take place next. One of the key things with that really promoted that was having an impact on culture is that when we initially introduced that process, it was often us noticing a serious incident and inserting ourselves into that situation, whereas now we're at a situation where after action reviews are requested from us, from registered managers, deputy managers, because they want that external oversight and just to look at those lessons learned, which has been quite positive. So with some of those key factors in place, what we've seen was we started to see a reduction in restrictive practices. So over a 5-year period, we collected data, and what we seen was as we were growing as a company, we were reducing restrictive practices year on year. One of the key things that we kind of looked at with that was we had to normalize our data, because if we looked back to how many people we supported in 2021 and only looked at total numbers of figures, it doesn't give you a true picture. Whereas if you're continuously looking at within your data how many people you're supporting versus how many interventions you're happening, it normalizes your data to see what progress is truly happening over a long period of time. To bring some of those processes that I mentioned into practice a bit more and to give a bit more context around them, I'm just going to talk through briefly an individual who we supported. So this person had a background, they had a diagnosis of autism, they'd learning disability, it's scoliosis, and they had a trauma history. So they'd been through some traumatic life experiences. Some of the primary concerns that were raised at the point of referral was that there was increased levels of physical aggression, which was often resulting in physical interventions and staff injuries. So this person was referred to the specialist support team, and we allocated them to tier 3 of our care offer. And essentially this meant that they had wraparound support from both our specialist support team, but also external colleagues. And there was weekly review meetings in place that were led by the allocated PBS lead. For this individual, as they were in tier 3, there was a multi-component intervention that took place from an MDT. So one of the key things we focused on was functional behavioral assessment. So we wanted to explore what were some of the behaviors communicating and how could we adapt our support based on what that person was telling us. We looked at things from a capable environments perspective and looked at the 10 key components of a capable environment. And we looked at areas that were working really well, but also areas for development, and that produced an action plan. We also completed regular after action reviews. And this primarily made sure that we were consistently looking at lessons learned and how we were going to change our practice. But this also provided the team with that level of support that they knew people were consistently looking at some of the incidents that they were experiencing and that they were trying to help to overcome some of these things, which helped staff morale. We very much adopted a trauma-informed approach. So as this person had been through some traumatic life experiences, we did training with the staff team, and we essentially went back to some of those experiences that person had faced, how this impacts on their day-to-day, and how our day-to-day support and care needs to change in order to be sensitive to some of those life experiences. We also captured the voice of the person we support. So we completed what we call preference assessments with the individual. And essentially what this looked at was sitting down with the person and exploring their preferences around support staff, because this gave us an insight into styles of support that they preferred. We explored things such as their weekly activities, what they liked doing, what they didn't like doing. And we also explored whether they associated certain activities with certain staff members. And this helped us to look at changes within the core staff team and also look at changes in rotas to facilitate what some of their preferences were, very much from a person-centered planning perspective. We also looked at their communication supports and what was in place, and we adapted some of this. We made sure there was structure and predictability in terms of making sure that they knew what was happening throughout the week, and we had speech and language therapy come in and support with some of these changes. We also made some environmental changes. So we had occupational therapy look at this from a sensory perspective and where the person may be overstimulated or understimulated. But we also looked at it from a behavioral perspective in terms of what were some of the key environmental triggers within that environment and how could we change them. So one of the key factors was staff changeovers. There was an increased number of staff coming on there when they were beginning shift, and this was leading to incidents on a consistent basis. So we looked at changing the location of the office to reduce that close proximity when staff were changing over, and also looking at how handovers took place, and having more kind of written handovers to reduce noise within the environment. We also involved psychiatry in making sure there was regular medication reviews and to make sure that the person medication levels were right, but that they also weren't experiencing any side effects or being over-medicated at any point. We included physio to look at things from a physical health perspective because the person had scoliosis. We also asked physio to look at some of the physical interventions that they were they were experiencing and to make sure that these were safe, because more often than not, physical intervention training is primarily aimed at people who don't have any physical impairments. So it's important if someone does have a physical disability or an impairment of to some degree, that we're getting external oversight and more kind of assurance around it. We included advocacy because we wanted to make sure that whilst we were capturing the voice of the person we support internally, we wanted an independent advocate to be exploring their preferences and things like that as well. And finally, we looked at involving psychology to make sure that we had a psychological formulation of the individual, and to make sure that all of the support that we were putting in place was moving in the right direction. So some of the outcomes of this was what we started to see was the intensity of incidents began to reduce, as well as the use of physical interventions over time. And by the end of the year, the person did not require any form of physical intervention for 3 months consecutively. And I think one of the key kind of areas of learning for us was it really demonstrates the importance of ensuring physical, social, psychological, behavioral, and environmental needs are being met, whilst ensuring that people's voices are at the center of everything that we do. So some kind of key conclusions is that I think this really highlights the importance of ensuring that PBS is not just delivered on an individual basis, but it's embedded into our systems and into the DNA of the organizations that we work in or manage. And staff capability building, data-driven decision making, organizational leadership alignment with PBS principles were very much central to the outcomes achieved, both at an individual and organizational level. If you don't have that buy-in from a leadership perspective, it will create a bit of a barrier with being able to roll out some of those processes and those frameworks to the best of their ability. And as I said at the beginning, the reduction of restrictive practices remains a critical priority across both health and social care services. And this is primarily from a safety perspective, because we want to ensure that there's fewer injuries to both staff and the people we support. From a dignity perspective, in terms of protecting autonomy and human rights. From a quality perspective, in terms of having more of a proactive skills building approach to support and culture. From a workforce perspective, in terms of less burnout, higher job satisfaction, less staff turnover, and from a risk perspective, in terms of reduced legal and compliance risk. I guess one of the takeaways that I kind of wanted to leave you with was the real measure of good support is not how well we manage people and what we may describe as crisis or people in distress, but how well we understand support and prevent crisis from happening at all or in the future. And if anyone has any questions.
Thank you so much, Stephen. So much information there. Really great examples. What I was really excited about when Stephen got in contact about doing this was that we could see real world impact, real world change, what that took. And I think those examples of seeing people have reduced restraint to the point of it not at all for 3 months, as you showed that example a couple of slides ago. Now, this is why we do it. We do it to give people lives that are better, that are meaningful, that are safer, and it has an impact on teams, and it is an expression of your ethos as well. I've got a question here from Emma. Did you distinguish between physical restrictions and others in your analysis? So in terms of what you described as restriction, what were the kind of the bounds of that in your data?
So our primary focus was physical interventions.
Okay.
So over that 5-year period, the data focused on reducing those physical interventions. And since then, we started looking at other types of restrictive practices. So we started looking at chemical restraint. So what that looks like is we do stomp audits now around that, and we look at the level of chemical restraint that's happening within our services and comparing that over time to see is that reducing. But for the purpose of this presentation, it primarily focused on physical restraints.
Okay, and with that look at chemical restraint, the intention there is, in some sense, do something similar where we can kind of track and hopefully, where appropriate, make reductions and reduce that.
And that's something that we hope to have more data on over time. So it's over the last couple of years we started looking at that, but we kind of want to get more robust data around that, similar to what we've gathered around physical interventions, to look at that progress over time and not in the short term.
Well, maybe next year you can talk about the chemical restraint reduction.
Yeah.
Let's see how the data goes. I've got another comment from James. A great sharing of the person's story and the data, and I think that's what really shone through here, is that it was not just data of facts and figures. It was showing the human impact of these changes, which really is what all of this is about. Brilliant, Stephen. Thank you so much.